All right, so today we're digging into something pretty interesting. Grain offerings, specifically how they're described in Leviticus chapter 2.
Yeah, some really fascinating stuff in there.
Definitely. So we're going to take a deep dive here and try to figure out exactly what these offerings were all about.
Right?
And, well, maybe what they might tell us about, those ancient practices.
Absolutely.
So starting right at the beginning, the first offering mentioned is actually pretty straightforward.
It is, yeah.
Finest flour, olive oil, and incense. Those are the basics.
The foundation, yeah.
Seems simple enough, but it's really interesting how those three things always seem to form the foundation.
Right, they're always there.
And a portion of the offering, together with all of that incense, it was burned.
Oh, yeah, that's key.
It's called the memorial portion in Leviticus.
Oh.
And it was considered, pleasing, at least according to the text.
Oh, true.
And then the rest. It went to Aaron and his sons, the priests.
Right, right.
So it's like, a symbolic gesture and then also a practical thing, all in one.
Yeah, I think the duality is really fascinating,
Yeah.
It's an offering that's clearly intended for, like a higher purpose that's symbolized by that burning incense, in the memorial portion.
Yeah.
But then it also serves this very real, like earthly function
Right, exactly.
in supporting the priesthood.
It speaks to both sides.
It does.
The spiritual and then just the practical aspect.
Absolutely, of their society, yeah.
Okay, so it wasn't just one set way to make these offerings, though, right?
No, definitely not.
Leviticus actually gets into some pretty specific details about different ways of preparing this stuff.
Yeah, different cooking methods, for sure.
Yeah, so you could bake it in an oven as loaves. Thick or thin, didn't matter.
Okay.
But no yeast.
No yeast.
That seems to be important. But you could brush it with olive oil if you wanted.
Okay.
Or there's the griddle option. So that's where you take the finest flour, mix it with oil, again, no yeast, and then crumble it up. And then you add even more olive oil.
So that seems like almost more of a crumbled topping kind of a thing, right?
Okay.
Like a streusel or something?
Yeah, like that. And then lastly, you could just cook it in a pan. Just the flour and the oil, nice and simple.
Straightforward, yeah.
But here's the thing. Notice how no matter which method you're using, the core ingredients, they always stay the same.
The finest flour and the olive oil, that's consistent.
Exactly. So that really makes you think those two things, they must have held some pretty significant meaning, right?
They must have, yeah.
Yeah.
Like they were fundamental to the whole thing,
Yeah.
and the different preparation methods, well, those could have been for different occasions.
Oh, interesting.
Or maybe even, they reflected the resources that someone had available to them at the time.
Right. Like if you only had a pan.
Exactly.
You do the pan method.
You make do with what you've got.
Okay, now here's something that might surprise you.
Okay.
For any grain offering that was burned as a food offering, no yeast and no honey. Really, those were strictly prohibited.
Wow, so those are out.
But here's the catch. You could bring yeast and honey as a firstfruits offering.
Okay, so there's an exception.
Yeah, just not burned on the altar. You couldn't use them for that pleasing aroma part.
Interesting, so there's a distinction there.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, yeast and honey, they both have those properties of fermentation and sweetness.
Right.
So maybe excluding them from the burned offering, it was about maintaining a certain kind of purity, you know?
Like a specific form of purity for that specific act.
Right. But allowing them as first fruits, but not for burning, it's almost like acknowledging, the fullness of the harvest.
Yeah, I see.
While still maintaining that specific protocol for what actually gets burned.
Like a separation of purposes almost.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fascinating.
And then there's salt. And this is not optional. This is a must.
Okay.
Leviticus is very clear about this.
Right.
Season all your grain offerings with salt, it says. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings. Add salt to all your offerings.
Wow, they really emphasize that.
Yeah, it's serious business.
They're not messing around with the salt.
And it's called the salt of the covenant.
Which sounds incredibly important, like deeply symbolic.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, salt, historically, it was absolutely vital for preservation.
Oh.
And it was often seen as this, symbol of a binding agreement, like a contract.
Oh.
So calling it the salt of the covenant, it kind of emphasizes that role it plays in the relationship between the people and their God.
Right.
It's like it's highlighting that this element was absolutely indispensable to the offering.
Wow. Okay, so last but not least, we have the first fruits offering itself. And this one involved taking crushed heads of new grain and roasting them
Okay.
with oil and incense. Sound familiar?
It's like a variation on that original theme.
It is. And just like that first offering, the memorial portion, the crushed grain, the oil, all the incense, it was all burned.
So they're really drawing a connection between the two types of offerings.
Yeah, it seems like it, right? And that first fruits offering, it's clearly marking the beginning of the harvest season.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So, offering the very first part of the yield, it seems like such a direct way to, acknowledge and give thanks.
Yeah, to express gratitude for that bounty.
Exactly. And then the fact that they, again, burn that memorial portion,
Right.
it really reinforces how symbolically important that central ritual was.
It's like they're really hammering home the importance of that act of burning.
Exactly.
That's so interesting.
So, okay, let's bring it all together.
All right.
What do we see? We see the consistent use of the finest flour, the key roles of olive oil and incense. We see that yeast and honey are specifically excluded when they're burning the offering.
Right, except for that first fruits exception.
Right, exactly. And then we see the absolute necessity of salt, the salt of the covenant.
Yeah, yeah. It's clear that these recurring elements, they likely held some really deep symbolic meaning within their culture and their religion.
Absolutely. It really makes you wonder, why did these specific details matter so much to them back then?
That's a great question.
What did those ingredients, those methods, what did they symbolize to the people who were making these offerings? And I guess even beyond that, are there echoes of this kind of really precise focus on specific ingredients in our own modern rituals or traditions,
Oh, for sure.
things that maybe we don't even consciously think about anymore?
Yeah, like why do we do the things that we do? And what do those things really represent?
Exactly. That's something to think about, after this deep dive. See if you can find some parallels in your own life.
That's a great takeaway for everyone listening. Really gets you thinking.
It does, yeah.